Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is fellow Forbes reporter Sarah Mueller. Sarah, welcome back.
Yes, I'm excited to be back. We got to speak to our very own Steve Forbes, so there's a lot coming.
Sarah, I'm really excited to delve into that conversation. But before we get to your latest guest on the Eye on Iowa segment, I do want to talk about what's going on in Iowa. We're about 10 months out from the Iowa Caucus. What or who are you seeing in Iowa right now?
Well, we've got Nikki Haley obviously making very, very good ground here in Iowa. She's had a number of events. Now she's been seen with Governor Kim Reynolds and Senator Joni Ernst. And as I talked about with our professor, Kelly Winfrey, she talks about when you have a female candidate running for office and she's working with other females in office, women in office, like Governor Kim Reynolds, who's our first female governor, and Joni Ernst, who's our first female senator. This is a very female power moment for them. And so Nikki Haley has had numerous events. We saw Donald Trump hold his first rally in Davenport. And he even made a stop at the Machine Shed, which is an iconic place to eat in Davenport and here in Des Moines. So he's going to local stomping grounds as well as hosting his big rallies. And then, as of this recording, Ron DeSantis hasn't announced his run for presidency, but he is on his book tour. So he did make appearances with Governor Kim Reynolds to discuss his book, which, as Steve Forbes says, is kind of the new calling card for if you're going to be running for president. So that's who we're seeing, and we're seeing a lot of progress.
So you're seeing Reynolds and Haley team up. In Iowa, have you ever seen this sort of female empowerment in the Iowa caucuses so early on?
I don't know if there's a straight answer for that, just given that we have had former female candidates before, but there is kind of this female empowerment edge that Nikki Haley is working with right now. That is a part of her campaign, that is a part of what she's talking about. And so this is going to be a repetitive theme as she campaigns.
And you spoke to our very own Steve Forbes. I do want to talk about that conversation just a little bit. Give us a taste of what you two discussed.
Steve Forbes ran for president in 96 and 2000. And his experience back then is very different than what it is today, but he even admits some of the faults that he had in his campaign versus what he looks back on. Hindsight is always 2020. So he talks a little bit about how what he ran for, the things he stood for in 96 and 2000 didn't end up being what the country needed. But what does that look like in a post-Trump, post-Biden era as we go into 2024? Now, as we look at the current things that are being discussed, he admits that we are looking at social issues such as the Supreme Court ruling on Roe v. Wade. And we also are looking at issues like Ukraine. How is the United States handling external defense issues? So there are a lot of things that we're talking about now that we weren't talking about over 20 years ago.
Hindsight is 2020, that's for sure. And he first ran for president almost 3 decades ago, both in 96 and 2000. So can you give us an overview of what the differences are in the Iowa caucuses from when he ran a few decades ago to now?
Well, a lot of it has to do with how are we using social media. He even admits he announced his campaign on the internet when he ran, and at the time it was kind of taboo. Why are you doing it this way? Well, now that is how we do everything, right? But there was a lot of similarities too. He spoke about how there's the ground game in Iowa. That's what we've been talking about a lot. And Nikki Haley is making that ground. If she can do these small events, and I say small relatively, when she's going to coffee shops, she's going to diners, and when somebody like Donald Trump needs to hold a rally, or he does make an appearance at a place called the Machine Shed for restaurant visits or whatever, what does that ground game look like in Iowa? It's a huge risk to overlook Iowa, and he even admits that. And he cited a couple of campaigns that did overlook Iowa, and they paid that price. And so we get into a little bit of why that is a problem and why candidates cannot overlook Iowa despite our first in the nation status being questioned.
Obviously, the ground game, as you've discussed week after week, is super important in Iowa, and big rallies are obviously a plus, but just how important are those smaller moves, going to the coffee shop, going to the diner?
I mean, they're everything. And that's exactly what he gets at is he talks about shaking hands. He talks about making that final push, bringing his family in. I mean, we even talked about the issue of having a beer with, right? We've discussed this on repeat, but there are some Iowans who will say that that's not what they're looking for. And one person he calls out in particular is Ron DeSantis. He's not necessarily the type of guy you would quickly have a beer with. He doesn't necessarily have that personality, but what he is good at is researching issues, knowing the ins and outs of issues, knowing the details. And that's where Iowans are going to be attracted to him. Now, we'll see how it all pans out when and if he finally announces his run. But in the meantime, when you have somebody like Nikki Haley who doesn't have the need for security or doesn't have the need for the volume of space, and she can just go and sit down in a coffee shop and share a coffee with a mom who's concerned about the public school system. But then you have somebody like Donald Trump who is appealing to thousands and he can't maybe make those more intimate connections. How is that going to play out? So we'll just have to wait and see. But for the most part, it would be beneficial for Trump to make those smaller appearances.
It sounds like, as a lifelong Iowan, you're saying you really can't underestimate the small gains made in the ground game. But Sarah, I don't want to wait any longer. Let's look at your conversation with Chairman and Editor-in-Chief of Forbes Media, Steve Forbes.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Steve. I am so excited to talk about your experience you had in 1996 and 2000 when you were on the campaign trail here in Iowa. Can you just start by telling us a little bit about your experience, maybe some of the things you took away from being on the campaign trail here?
Well, I think, first of all, the Iowa caucuses should remain, and hopefully the Democrats will see the light on that. It's a way in which outsiders can break in, most famously with Jimmy Carter back in 1976. Starting off in a bigger state, you need a budget for media and everything else. In Iowa, it shows your skills, one, in putting together an organization, a grassroots organization. Two, people are keenly interested, and so they ask you questions, not gotcha questions, but questions on how you see various issues, and they'll bore in on it. They do it with real interest. They know the issues. They see this as a real responsibility, civic responsibility. Also, you learn to deal with special interests and on a grassroots level. And so in terms of the concept, that is a sound one. Iowa, as you know, traditionally has been, for at least over 40 years, has been first in the nation. Then you have New Hampshire, the first primary in the nation. The reason that works certainly on the Republican side is it underscores how diverse this nation is, not in the politically correct sense, but in terms of people's interests and what they focus on. As a general rule, and this is very general, and there are numerous exceptions in Iowa and New Hampshire, but in Iowa in normal times, Republicans are more interested in social issues than they are in economic issues. And in New Hampshire, it's the exact opposite. New Hampshire is the one state where in a primary, was probably the only state in the country in a Republican primary where if you had a referendum on the abortion issue, it's where a choice would win over life. And so you have within the same party, two very, very different focuses. So it makes you realize that the two parties in this country are coalitions of you can focus on specific issues, but people's interests do vary, and how you keep that coalition together certainly hones your political skills. So I hope the Democrats will come around. I'm not sure they will. I have my own opinions on the party right now, but on the Republican side, I think they will keep with it because it's the only way those who are not in the front at the beginning can have a chance to put together coalitions and to break in. And Iowa does, though, have enough diversity where if you know how to organize the state, even if you're going against the grain on certain issues, you can still pull it off. So I'm not sure I should mention this example given everything today, but in 2008, Rudy Giuliani, then the mayor of the nation, made a bid for the Republican nomination, and he is pro-choice. So that would certainly mean, by conventional sense, that in Iowa he would do very poorly, and he didn't make much of an effort in Iowa. I came out a couple of times for him, and they really didn't go all out. We made recommendations to the campaign on who to put together, team to put together to organize the state, because there are pockets, West Des Moines and other areas at the time, where he could have made a showing. And given the number of candidates at the time, if he had made a real effort here, he could have finished third, a strong third, or probably second. If he had finished second place in Iowa, he would have gone barreling into New Hampshire, a state ready-made for him, and he would have been on his way to the nomination. But he chose not to do it. So in terms of my own experiences with Iowa, it is very intense. And in 2000, when they had the Republicans have this thing in August, where straw poll, as they call it, and you show there your organizational prowess. And so in the lead up in 2000, I and my wife and our youngest daughter spent 5 weeks on a bus touring the state. We had a team that put together 5 to 6 events a day, where we could make a play against the formidable front runner George W. Bush, and we came close, but not close enough. But I was a chance where you can do it. So you go in, and it also forces you to hone your message. For example, I found when I proposed the flat tax, I could talk blue in the face how it was a tax cut for everyone. No one would lose, but people were skeptical. So I finally changed the message a little bit, where if we put in a flat tax, you as a taxpayer for a while would have a choice between the new flat tax system and the old system. See for yourself which one is better. Well, by doing that, people then say, okay, I get to make the choice. I don't have to trust you. And it's also a way of diffusing the concern about charitable giving, home buying, and that sort of thing.
You are bringing up
and by the way, in special interests, you learn in Iowa that one of the special interests, of course, is ethanol. And I had in '96 expressed some reservations about ethanol. And boy, I have the scars today to show for that. And so I learned in 2000, say you'll give a trial period for ethanol, say 5 years or 8 years, and then we'll see if it works. But since I'm not running, I can say it today. Ronald Reagan was right. When you have a government program, it's the closest thing to immortality on this earth.
You're absolutely hitting a ton of points that we have not only addressed with prior experts, but that we can dig into more. I want to back up to what you're talking about with candidates who can really make a name for themselves in Iowa, whether they have that name recognition to start or not. And
right.
The famous example is Jimmy Carter. Now we have candidates like Nikki Haley stepping into the race, which now we're circulating her name more often. But when she's going up against a powerhouse like Donald Trump or, possibly DeSantis, what chance does she have? And what do you think that she needs to do in order to make a strong campaign?
Well, you have to decide how much of an effort you want to make in Iowa. And if you don't, you're taking a high risk. But and if you want to make a stand, say in New Hampshire, Giuliani, for example, in 2008 decided to make a stand in Florida and didn't go all out in Iowa and New Hampshire, and it cost him. He could have done it in Iowa and New Hampshire and didn't. And by the time he got to Florida, he ended up finishing third. So in the case of Nikki Haley and other possible candidates, who's out there now putting together a team? There are people who've had experience with the caucuses. And remember, in 2016, Donald Trump lost in Iowa to Ted Cruz. Cruz could not really build on that in New Hampshire, but he did get some momentum coming out of Iowa. Trump came back in New Hampshire and then again in South Carolina. But who right now is out there putting who are they bringing on? Who are they? How are they organizing the state? What issues are they going to start to hammer? And how much time are they willing to spend out there? And so with Nikki Haley, I want to know, okay, who are you bringing on board? And how you propose to organize the state? And how much time are you going to spend there?
On the note of spending time here, we've also seen candidates just throw up some ads, throw up some billboards, and check out because they don't think they're going to perform well here, or maybe they don't want to put their resources here. Now, with things happening with the change of status for first in the nation for Democrats, how do you think that's going to change the Democratic campaign elements here in Iowa? Do you think they're going to stop here yet?
Well, the problem with the Democrats in Iowa was they really made a hash of the caucuses. They really were the first to have crazy rules on it instead of a straight you get votes or you don't. And then they botched it in terms of technology, made a real hash of it. So you knew something was going to happen. But more than the technical difficulties was that Joe Biden had a lousy performance in Iowa. He had a lousy performance in New Hampshire. And it wasn't until South Carolina came along and the Democratic establishment decided Bernie Sanders was about to do to the Democrats what Donald Trump did 4 years before and have a hostile takeover of the party. And Bernie did well. And Bernie also did well following Iowa and New Hampshire and Nevada. And so the Democrats thought, oh my God, he's going to do it. So they rallied behind Biden, who was floundering, and Clyburn, Representative Clyburn, and others went all out for him in South Carolina, and browbeat the other candidates into leaving the race. And so was Biden versus Bernie, and Biden won. But so that's why they want to begin elsewhere rather than Iowa, where Biden's deficiencies. You know, in Iowa, you cannot run a cellar campaign and hide in a cellar and just do some messages. Ain't going to work. And doing sort of a flyby over Iowa is not going to work either. A few ads is not going to work. You got to be there. People want to press the flesh, so to speak, and size you up. So they may denigrate Iowa, the Democrats, downgrade it, but they've also made it very difficult for outsiders really to break in. If you have to start with a full-blown primary, and today it takes bucks, it takes real social media savvy, and so unless you knock it out in these debates where you have 20 people on the stage at once, you're gonna have trouble breaking through. And that's why, again, the early states, smaller states like Iowa and New Hampshire, play a critical role in enabling. It doesn't guarantee if you win in New Hampshire or Iowa, you're going to go on to the nomination, but at least it makes you can make you into a formidable player.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up because I actually talked to Troy Price, who is the former party chair for Iowa, who dealt with the 2020 fiasco. And one of the things we talked about was even if Iowa doesn't go first for the Democrats, the whole media circus is going to be here for the Republicans. So all eyes are going to be here. It would be kind of irrational for a Democratic candidate not to have some sort of presence here, even if we don't go first. So is that like running two campaigns if you're going to try and be here in Iowa and then go on to wherever's next and try and kind of run multiple circuits at once? I mean, how costly would that be?
Well, it's a real challenge. And in terms of Iowa, I think it's going to be who's going to decide if you can walk and chew gum at the same time, so to speak, or multitask. And that is going in Iowa and going in the other early states, and hoping that because the Democrats are going to largely avoid Iowa, you have sort of an open stage in which you can go on, and the media will give you some coverage just because they're not going to just focus on Republicans as a sidebar. They're going to focus on who is actually still traipsing in Iowa, trying to pull a Jimmy Carter, even though Iowa is no longer leading the pack. So we'll see who's a good strategizer, who can pull off a Ukraine kind of upset by not going with the conventional wisdom.
Absolutely. Now, something else we've talked about is this Jimmy Carter-esque approach to Iowa, and something that we also keep kind of bringing up as a saying that Iowans use is, can I have a beer with them? Can I have a beer with this candidate? Are they personable? Will they talk about the issues with me? Who do you think is going to thrive under that concept? Who's not going to thrive? I mean, we have Donald Trump, who's gone through this now twice, and he did fairly decent in 2016 and 2020, but do you think he's going to keep ramping up with that personable approach, or somebody like Nikki Haley or DeSantis is going to do better?
Well, Donald Trump may decide to leave Iowa altogether. And what's going to make it very interesting is that you have the governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, is actively looking at whether he's going to run. So Trump may decide to make his stand in South Carolina, where he did very well in 2016, and say Iowa is small, but he's got to be careful not to diss Iowa, because unlike previous Republican candidates, George Bush carried in 2004, but since the mid 80s, Iowa has been largely voting for the Democrats, as they did many times. And 2008, 2012, Trump carried it in 2016 and 2020. But that was a break from the recent past. Remember, in 1988, Iowa voted for the caucus in the general election. So, and Clinton carried it in 92 and 96, and first time against Gore against Bush in 2000. So Iowa had been up for grabs. And so in terms of, I don't think Trump will want to diss it. He may decide he can put something together with his base, that he has an advantage in organization just by his adherence from the last 8 years, and make a play and hope that the divided field enables him to proclaim victory. Say, I did better this time than I did in 2016. We know how that turned out. So he's got to make decisions on that. And I don't know what he's doing in Iowa in terms of putting together an organization, or whether he feels that he has enough of a base where he can come in and do a series of rallies and rely on that, instead of the old-fashioned way of going to breakfast with 10 people and stitching it together event by event.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because as of this recording, we are going to have an event, a rally for Trump in Davenport this next week. And also we have coming to town promoting his book is Ron DeSantis. Now, it feels like we've got Trump on one side as an incumbent. Biden hasn't announced as of yet, and he could obviously be an incumbent on his side. Now, who's going to throw a wrench in the plan? And I think Ron DeSantis is one of those options as for the Republicans that could really throw off Donald Trump's campaign. Now, what are your thoughts on Ron DeSantis going, and also his new book? I mean, is this a...
Well, one of the things that's happened in recent times is, if you're a candidate, you have a book. Everyone writes a book. And so DeSantis having a book is, if he didn't have one, you'd know he's probably not going to run. So that's one sign that he is going to run. And everyone says he'll wait till the Florida legislative session is over, where he's going to score some points there in terms of issues that are concerning the Republican Party. And he also has certainly demonstrated in Florida he can appeal to independents and, amazingly, a lot of Democrats. So right now, people like Nikki Haley and Senator Scott and all the others looking are really probably going to adopt the same approach. And that is, they see Trump and DeSantis being the front runners, knocking each other's brains out. and then coming in the middle and picking up the pieces. But they're all thinking they can do that. So we'll see how that plays out. And it could be a situation where somebody does the Cinderella story, comes in and actually wins because the front runners are knock each other out and people are looking for a new face. DeSantis is almost a regular now. The base likes him. They're impressed with what he did in Florida. So I would say that and the fact that one of the raps, for example, against DeSantis is he's not a type of guy you'd normally have a beer with. But the nice thing about Iowa is if you go there and ask for support and make the rounds of the state, people will overlook and say, I'm looking for a president, not a beer mate. And one thing DeSantis does is he focuses on issues. He studies his brief. He knows things in incredible detail that I think will hold him in good stead when he does these events, town halls, and the like.
One thing you also mentioned was issues. And we talk a lot about ethanol. I mean, even our local legislators, and I say local as in US senators, such as Joni Ernst or even Governor Kim Reynolds, are very hard on ethanol. We're also looking at a lot of social issues, as you've discussed too. We have some LGBTQ legislation currently in our state house that are being debated, and it's causing a lot of conversation here. We have concerns about the economy. So there's a wide spread of things that people are talking about. What do you think are going to be the main issues that are concerning in this campaign season for Iowa?
Well, the economy is going to be, unfortunately, a top issue because the economy is not going to be performing as well as it should. Another thing that's going to be happening is geopolitical. What should U.S. foreign policy be? Why do we repair our bad defenses? There is I'll call it isolationist element that doesn't see why we're helping Ukraine, even though that's where Ukraine actually beats the Russians, beats Putin. That'll have a profound effect on others like Xi Jinping and Taiwan. Hello, it's an interconnected world. So those are going to be of top concern. And on social issues, I don't know what the Iowa legislature is going to do, but one of the things that I think is coming across is that the Democrats still want to make it sound like the Supreme Court is banning abortion. All it did was throw it back to the states, but the Republicans have, be blunt about it, have fumbled that in many states. And I think what most states will end up doing, I'm pro-life, but I have to accept reality, is that most states will go what most countries have done. 12 weeks, 15 weeks after that, unless you're truly got a medical emergency, that's it. You can't abort one day before 9 months of pregnancy. And so I think most states will do what most countries have done. And so then you take it from there. How do you change minds from that? And so I think the key thing for Republicans is remove the fear factor and say, here's where I stand. And we have to persuade people and take it from there. But the key thing people will be immediately concerned about, they know, I think people are beginning to realize on the local level, that's where social issues like abortion are going to be battled out, not in Congress, but on the local level, that the economy is going to be something that does have national implications, obviously, and international implications. So the economy and geopolitical, I think, will be at the top. Another one will be crime. Again, that is local, but the attitude on the federal level is going to be key. And I think you're going to see people coming into Iowa, if they do, praising Governor Reynolds for her very good legislation, I think, on education savings accounts, ESAs, which again are local, but the Republicans believe in parental choice.
maybe I'm getting a little too in the weeds here, and let me know, but let's stick with Governor Reynolds.
And in Iowa, you do stick in the weeds.
Yes, you do. Now, Governor Kim Reynolds has been kind of a topic of conversation because she stayed so hard in her values, especially during the pandemic. She kept a lot of businesses open. She kept schools open. She was very hard about, how she was going to handle the pandemic as one of the few Republican candidates that leaned very far right in that issue. Now, we're looking at candidates like Ron DeSantis coming to town, and she's standing on stage with him. Same with somebody like Nikki Haley. She stood on stage with Nikki Haley, but she has historically supported Trump too. So how far do these governors or even state senators, their backing go for a candidate?
Well, I think you're going to see some who will say, I could go with Donald Trump, or I could go with a new candidate, take an entrepreneurial risk, or feel that a new candidate would have perhaps a broader appeal, even if there's not much difference on tax issues, for example, between the candidates. So I think you'll find. I don't think you'll find them lining up in lockstep. And I think the pressure of events for most of them is going to mean they're going to have to eventually take a stand. And so that's why they're going to look very closely at a Nikki Haley. How does she do in answering the probing questions? And also, how well does she improve as a candidate by going through that experience, coming in early and getting yourself limbered up, so to speak, before the national focus becomes even more intense. So in terms of endorsements, I think the governor will probably try to stay on the sidelines, saying, welcome all. I'm not going to push out anyone. Hint, I'm in the center of the country. Hint, make a great number two. and rightly so. She's put together a very impressive record, both on education and taxes, which got my attention.
Now, you obviously ran in 1996 and 2000, and now you've watched other campaigns run, and the whole political game has changed. If you were to be running now for this next election, how would you do things different? What would you be your pieces of advice for people running? I mean, how would you view this?
Well, I think in terms of the Iowa caucuses and even the New Hampshire primary is, yes, you've got social media. I've sort of was considered revolutionary when I announced in 1999 for 2000. I did it on the internet, and no one had done it before. And reporters asked, why do you waste this opportunity on the internet? Nobody watches the internet. Not realizing that, the internet has a life of its own. And why don't you do it the traditional way? So even though the tools are different, again, it's not enough to send out messages. You have to go there and make an appeal. And so I think it's going to be very basic. You got to go out there, put together an organization, bring on people who know the state, know how to put together events, and know how to know where here's where you can trip up, here's where you have an opportunity, make what kind of judgment do you exercise? And you have to have also, I would advise them, a real issue. It's not enough to say, we got to get America moving ahead again. We need a strong defense, all very great. What specifically do you have in mind? And people want to get a little granular, precisely because I think the mood in the country is they really don't like either party very much. They may prefer one to the other, but a lot of people get the idea, well, when they get in power, they just go mucking up the way they always do. So the trust factor is going to be critical going, and that you can only do by going out there and having people say, yeah, I like this person. I think this is somebody we can go with.